All right. Well, hey, everybody. We are trying out a new format here at Teach for America because we really want to ensure that we are allowing all of our folks who are so devoted to what's happening in education right now a real area of opportunity to hear directly from folks working on the front lines of the current pandemic and our response about what's going on in schools. And so, as y'all know, my name is Cary Wright. I'm the executive director of Teach for America's region here in Dallas-Fort Worth, and I am excited today to be joined by Yuri, who will share a little bit about her story and her current work at Teach for America. But again, our hope today is to just give you a quick glimpse into how our students and how teachers in our school systems across Dallas-Fort Worth are currently navigating what's going on with education in the wake of COVID-19 and a lot of the big questions out there about what might come next. So with that, Yuri, tell us a little bit about yourself, tell us about your role, and give us a sense about kind of how you thought about your role before a lot of the things going on right now with the pandemic, and how has that changed now in the aftermath of all this?
Sure. Hi, Carrie, and hi, everyone. My name is Judy Lopez. I was actually a 2013 DFW core member, and I stayed in the classroom teaching for 6 years. Afterward, I actually came on staff, and I'm now a manager of teacher leadership development, or an MTLD. And prior to this, and well, during this, I support 24 first-year teachers, and they run the range from kindergarten to 12th grade, everything within core subjects, so math, science, social studies, and literacy or reading. I support them at 3 different districts and 13 different campuses. And they are in different areas of Dallas. So I'm within Pleasant Grove, West Dallas, Northwest Dallas, and Southwest Fort Worth. Now, this is what I used beforehand. I used to travel from campus to campus, doing everything from classroom observations to having one-on-one coaching conversations with core members, and those were in person or virtual. And well, during this global pandemic, it's so strange to just say global pandemic. But now that we've switched completely to virtual, it still works fairly the same in the sense of I still support teachers in their development for their instructional development and their leadership development. But now it's adapting to all of the different things that they have to do now. So some of my teachers are teaching what they're referring to as synchronous, which means like live teaching or virtual teaching, that where they could see their students every day. Some teachers are what it's called asynchronous learning, which means that like you post a couple of assignments a week and students are required to finish them, and then teachers just grade it. And it's just been very different. So my role has changed in really drastic ways, I would say, in terms of like support, because I never did virtual learning. I didn't teach a class completely 100% online. And so my teachers are having to handle a completely different world, not only just being at home and like shelter in place, but students that don't have technology at home, and they've like, most schools, the last day that they've had classes were kind of like dispersing computers, or in the week afterward. We're still running into some issues of kids not having internet at home. And so it's like supporting teachers in how to connect with parents. I've been doing a lot of translating work, but that's mostly because teachers don't have that kind of access right now. And districts are overwhelmed. So it's been a lot different. And teachers are adapting fairly quickly. They had to.
So, and you've spoken a little bit about this, but obviously you talked about a group of 24 TFA first year teachers that you support. And for all the folks out there listening, there are this year over 200 first and second year TFA teachers that we call core members. And there's an additional about 450 TFA alumni who are still teachers in the classroom. Those folks work across 6 different districts across Fort Worth and Dallas. And they serve about 80 schools. And so I'm curious, Yuri, I know you have sort of insight into this group of 24 teachers, but what would you say are the general themes that you're seeing around the needs that students are facing right now, and also the opportunities that you see in this current moment across that sort of wide swath of teachers and districts that you support?
Sure. Some of the general needs, I would say, or like trend of needs, have been first and foremost technology. Just access to an actual device. Something that we ran into early on was that there was like one computer at home. So usually districts ask that kind of question, like, is there any technology at home? And they answer yes, like a family could answer yes. But if you have a high schooler, a middle schooler, and an elementary school student in the same home, then it was first a matter of getting a device for each student. Then it was internet needs. I would say that was the next big pattern that showed up within my cohort, was just making sure that all kids had access to internet, and using some of these like free resources that started kind of coming up from Spectrum and other entities that were just providing it for families in need. After that, there was a larger need to just like access the technology. A lot of districts went straight to Google Classroom, and it isn't like individual like intricacies to the system that require just like knowing how to navigate general technology, or like logging in and out, knowing passwords, things like that. And for campuses that didn't use technology beforehand, or didn't have a one-to-one technology, meaning that like for each student at each campus there was a device for them, they didn't know how to log on. They forgot their password. Then an entire system backed up of just kids trying to find out passwords. And it wasn't a simple like you know how you usually try to get a password where you just click on something and you like redo. It wasn't like that. And so about the first week and a half was essentially teachers being a sort of tech support, and like
just trying to figure out access to this new platform.
Exactly. And then amongst that, figuring out that some kids didn't have access to computers, and like, so it was like a back and forth of that. And then I think that's been a lot of what's happened now, has been that like and by we, it's like my cohort and each of the teachers at their campuses are figuring out how to build system of teaching kids how to use Google Classroom, how to use all of these online systems that they never had to use before. And finding out that there were some gaps in just understanding and learning technology. I think we often make the assumption that, oh, kids these days, they know how to navigate all these things easily. They know how to like tap, and they might know how to click through some things, and they love social media. But that didn't mean that writing emails, simple things like that, or like responding back and forth, were actually a struggle for the first week and a half or so. It still is. And so I think that is where some of our big opportunities are, that an entire system of like education was shocked by a global pandemic, and we were all forced to go virtual. But amongst this, we're seeing a lot of gaps that are required to be filled. Like, there is no way that we cannot support kids in navigating online or virtual learning without just learning how to make yourself a digital native, or someone that is very comfortable with it.
It strikes me that in a somewhat ironic way, that's also like truly preparing kids for the jobs of the future in many respects. So there's like an interesting opportunity that exists amidst all this, even though the rollout of it's been really complicated and there's significant access gaps that still exist. Like when I hear you talking about just like the basics of writing emails, hosting, web calls, like it strikes me those are the things that all of us right now, sort of in the working force of America, are navigating and sort of working within. So in an interesting way, it's also an opportunity where some extent of their educational experience is almost now more aligned with the potential workforce of the 21st century and jobs that they are likely going to have when they graduate from high school and college. So
yes, definitely. And I think even more so, it centered around like student ownership of their learning. That's been one of the minor pieces that is actually a major piece, has been that you have no control of giving them everything, and like being in the same space where you put something in front of them and that's it. Or like you can directly teach it, and then have kids just kind of be, I guess the word would be like handheld. And that now my teachers are feeling that. They're feeling like I can't just like handhold them anymore. So they're having to provide the steps, and they're creating videos and different things for kids to kind of take ownership of their own learning, because they are at home and by themselves. And oftentimes parents are at work, because that's been another piece of it, where parents are often essential workers, so they are not home to support or help kids with that learning. So kids are having to take ownership of that, which has shown, interestingly enough, that they're turning in more work than they did before.
Huh. So what's your sense, sort of, you spoke to a little bit of the complexities of rolling out this new platform across school systems. And as we're getting more and more capable of rolling those things out and then sort of effectively, administering them ongoing, what's your current sense across all your teachers of student participation? Like, are we seeing 20% of students show up for classes on a daily basis? Is it 50%, 80%? Does it just depend on the grade, subject, and school? Or sort of what are you noticing in terms of student participation in this current environment?
It definitely varies by grade, subject, and school. We're noticing that, especially for lower elementary or like elementary, a lot more students are coming to like live, some kind of like live discussion or live like learning. And when they don't, it's usually related to something to technology, couldn't access, because I mean, we're talking about kindergartners having to log on to something, which is difficult. And then when it comes to the high school, then it's more so, more of my teachers at high school are not having synchronous learning. For the most part, they are assignments that are posted, and then they are required to complete. But we are seeing that even within that, it's a range of submissions. So some, and we the one thing that is coming up the most is that prior really strong relationships those are the kids that are showing up and submitting the same work. So I thought that was actually a really interesting piece, and the teachers are noticing that as well, in the sense that like, oh wow, I really focused and built relationships, and now we're seeing them like come through. The kids are showing up and they're wanting to do the work. When in the opposite end, they like can individual identify like, wow, I really didn't like push that much of a relationship with this student. And so that student, they haven't heard from, or they see very few submissions of that work. And
And that
so,
that strikes me as a fundamental too of how we think about like excellence in teaching, regardless of virtual or not.
mhm.
And so it's interesting to hear you say that. And I'm curious, are there other things that you see as just sort of what we view as excellence in teaching and in teacher leadership that you're also finding show up in this moment in time, that sort of regardless of whether it's virtual learning or in-person learning, these are just principles that we know are important, and our teachers are actually seeing how important they are now more than ever in this new format? What else comes to mind?
Mhm. I think one of the big ones that comes to mind is culturally responsive teaching. And not only through that lens of building relationships, but also understanding just the world in that we're currently in, right? Again, it's strange to say global pandemic, but you know, a lot of families and people are isolated to just their home, and they're going through a range of things that mostly are related to socioeconomic status. So your parent is an essential worker, and that like parent is not home and therefore cannot help you with learning every day. That's just a simple part of it. Beyond that is then healthcare, any kind of like access to food, things like that are starting to pop up. So then the teachers that are becoming aware of them are saying like, oh wow, like thinking about what you require for work or how you make things relative to your students' experience, they are more likely to respond to you and more likely to want to invest themselves in that learning, because they're understanding that you understand them and what they're going through right now. A
Yeah.
lot of our teachers are really focusing on essentially mental health pieces or like work for our kids, which I thought was really helpful. And they're combining it with instructional requirements. So for example, if you're gonna write an essay, you can write an essay related to this current experience, or you do research on like the understanding of COVID-19 and like the science background of it. Things like that are starting to come up. So it's kind of two birds with one stone. Like not only are you providing academic excellence and like progress, but you're also helping kids understand the world around them, which then I think is creating kids that are much more well informed, can inform their families, especially during this time. And they are figuring out that this role of being an excellent educator goes beyond just let me put this lesson in front of you and it's 90 minutes on this day or every other day. but rather it's like developing citizens that are productive members of society, kids that are going to be really invested in making better choices for themselves, their families, their communities. Um, and it's unfortunate that it had to be this that like really kind of like drilled it home. But as first year teachers, they're understanding how deeply this goes.
Yeah, and you're making me think about one of our alumni teachers, Daniel Garrison, at Woodrow Wilson High School in Dallas ISD, who teaches engineering, and he has basically been in action on taking his curriculum and really retrofitting it to meet the moment. So his kids are right now working on projects using 3D printers to create surgical masks for area healthcare workers on the front lines,
Cool.
and so he's really focused on how uh, to your point, really be responsive to this moment and figure out like learning shouldn't just happen in isolation. It should actually be met with the needs and demands and opportunities of the world that we're in. And it's super exciting to see how a teacher can really take an approach that really unlocks the potential of their students to see an opportunity for real leadership at a moment like this to
Mhm.
say, hey, a lot of us, we don't have the answers about this as a society, and we're going to be much better off if we also start to really invest in this next generation of our kids
Mhm.
coming up as students right now and starting to just be real with them about the problems that face, our
Mhm.
community and humanity, and starting to invite them in to say, here's the big questions. Like, let's all get into those questions and start to make those real practical applications to what you're learning now and how it might be important in setting you up to help us address some of these big unknowns ahead of us. But I'm curious, like from your work with your teachers or other teachers that you're seeing out in the field, like what, at TFA, one of the big things about our people is just their capacities for leadership. And what I think about in terms of that leadership is really seeing opportunity amidst crisis and problems to think about things in a new way and to potentially, bring something fresh to the table that could really help unlock and create a new avenue for work to be done that can better meet the needs of kids, of our communities, of our schools. So I'm curious, like, have you come across or have you been working with any teachers where you've just really seen some exciting examples of leadership that is really standing out to you right now as something that's sort of having you reflect more about that?
Yeah, there's been, and there's kind of like two buckets of it. One bucket is in terms of leadership of just like the immediate, like how right now during all of this, some of our people have really like adjusted and helped their campuses, entire campuses adjust in terms of virtual learning and like shifting toward a whole entire virtual life. And then there's another bucket of core members that are thinking um, past this and then beyond of like using this time to develop themselves and like develop systems or develop programs that would take place when next school year or after when they're like in schools. Um, so first bucket of adapting right now during again global pandemic has been like core members have taken on just like how to adapt and how to develop Google Classrooms. And we have, well, the majority of my cohort is under the age of 24. And so they have like more of like a facility with online learning, and there are campuses where they have an entire faculty where not everyone has the same facility using technology. And so they've developed videos of how to develop these Google Classrooms, how to use some of the other applications, and then they share the videos with their entire staff, which I know for them, it was more so just like, hey, I got so many questions. Let me just create this video so that way everyone can adapt a lot faster. And what we're seeing from that is that we have administrations that are able to now have full like working classrooms that before wouldn't have taken place or would have taken longer. And so our core members were stepping up and saying like, hey, actually, I found this pretty easy. I'm pretty like, or I used it already. Let me just create a quick video for you and do some virtual office hours. So that way we make sure that all kids have access to virtual learning.
So just seeing a need and stepping right into it where they can.
Yep, really quickly too. And then we have a couple of, or like not a couple, but like then the other bucket would be what happens after this, right? So then some of our core members are noticing that right now communicating with parents was very difficult because we have some systems where phone numbers are old, or there was no email, there was no way to access a parent, or it was an old phone number for a parent. And so as that's been getting updated, they have noticed that parents are not comfortable or don't feel as safe coming to campuses. And so they started to kind of wonder, like, what is causing this? Like, where did this come from? And so they are thinking about starting next year and having something more open and like honest with parents. And so creating that like open door, like communication. And so I have a current core member that's working on like family nights for the fall. So when the school year starts, parents feel a little bit more comfortable, especially since we don't know what's going to happen later in the year, or if this kind of happened, like once shelter in place is lifted, if it ever comes back again, we do not want to be stuck in the same position where everything is just like crazy and chaotic. Core members are working on like, how can I make something more systematic? How can I connect with parents right now and build systems for the beginning of the school year, so that way it's an easier transition.
Yeah.
Another that have a like one of my core members is working on a really exciting project where she's focusing on literacy initiatives. So she is an 8th grade English teacher, and she noticed that her kids didn't have books at home. And she was thinking of this really cool book study to do toward the end of the year that now she still wants to do. So she's collecting donations since she can't access her books anymore. She's collecting donations so that way she can get her books to all her students, go do drop-offs at their houses, or do some kind of like centralized pickup location. And then she's contacting some like celebrities and notable people so that way they can read chapters of the book to the kids.
Cool.
And kids would be more so like thinking or like feeling like the inspiration of like reading and seeing that like when you're stuck at home, you can actually do this, and turning that into like pieces of like lessons that she's going to be rolling out. So we're really seeing teachers kind of take the time right now to figure out like, how can I make all of this just feel like it's better than being stuck at home.
Yeah. And we can close with this question because I know you and I could talk all day probably, but it just strikes me on that last example that you gave. I think like in a way, obviously there's so many horrible things that we're going to be navigating together as a community in the months and maybe even years to come as a result of COVID-19. But I also think about that last example, and I think of the opportunity that exists in using these present circumstances to start to implement things that we might not have otherwise realized we could or should be doing before all this happened. So that idea of like, why not be hosting read aloud programs using local influencers who could really excite kids and families about the importance of literacy and of reading. And like, I wonder, like, would people have gotten to that solution before all of this happened? So in a way, I see this as a moment too that's going to offer us a lot of new opportunities to see things, to see problems, and to come at those problems with a possible new set of solutions. And so I'm curious, just from your perspective, like given all the access you have to what's going on sort of at the front lines of education, so to speak, what just gives you hope about the circumstances we're in right now? And what do you see as real possibilities for what lies ahead?
I think hope is definitely what I've seen from my core members in really stepping up and taking this as a challenge that there is no excuse for. At first I think I was a little bit concerned because I mean I was concerned about everyone, not in terms of like just like, are you okay? And they were immediately just like flipped the switch and said like, I need to figure things out for my kids and the families that I interact with, and it was immediate. And so it really gives me a lot of hope that they're developing and taking the initiative. And I think the possibility is it's really in that our entire system was shocked and forced to adapt. And there like similar to what my core members like said, it's like there is no excuse other than to move forward and think innovatively and think in different ways to make sure that excellent education can still happen. And I think like districts, school districts, and like the entire educational system often stays in a place of comfort and has stayed in a place of comfort, that now it's no one is there in a place of comfort, right? Like we had to think completely broadly. And so I think this is a place where there's going to be a lot of new opportunities to just expand on what excellent education can mean, especially shifting learning to be adapted much more to 21st century skills, because we really have no other choice. And so I think that's actually a lot of what is good, or like the silver lining of a situation like this.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, it is sobering to think that, nearly 1 in 4 kids in our community are growing up in poverty. And one of the things that they are counting on most to change that reality is an excellent education. And I just think as we navigate through this and consider what happens on the other side, I just think there's a bounty of opportunity to think differently about how do we use this moment to really provide resources to kids who need them most in a more equitable way. And whether that's through technology or access to quality teachers or more resources provided to their school or potentially straight to their homes if we end up in this situation for a prolonged period of time. I just think there's a lot of opportunity amidst this moment of crisis to sort of step back and ask ourselves this bigger question of, how is it that we can realize this vision at TFA of providing every kid with an excellent education that we know they deserve? And I think our ability to get at that answer now, we might be coming up with some new answers today than we would have in January. And I think there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of really compelling and exciting opportunity amidst all of the really challenging days ahead of us to think about what those potential things could be. And I think it's exciting to think about that too, as not just being a Teach for America question or responsibility. That's something that we are arm in arm with several million people across our communities in Fort Worth and Dallas thinking about this opportunity in question. And it's exciting to just think about the collective wisdom that we're going to mine at this moment, and the ability we're going to have to also kind of come back to our priorities as a community and ask ourselves, like, okay, on the other side of this, could we really go at achieving this priority in a much different way than we did before? And I think that gives me a lot of hope about what's ahead for us and most importantly for our students. So with that, I appreciate your time for today, just giving us a glimpse into kind of what you see is going on in the schools that you're supporting. And I'm hopeful for those who are listening, if you found this interesting, that we might keep it going. So let us know your comments, your feedback, any questions that you have, because we'd love to stay in touch and to share some more insights that we can gather through the Teach for America Network about what's going on for students amidst all that's happening in the world right now. So with that, we hope that you all stay well and be safe, and we'll look forward to talking to you more soon. All right, thanks.